Cheers everyone, welcome back. Grandma's Handbag, top 100 time. Thank you so much for joining us. Grandma's Little Helper, the Lord Nelson 3 Sheets Pale Ale. 3 sheets to the wind. Maybe by the end of this one I might be. Lovely fruity stuff, nice and sessionable, and hopefully we'll down it throughout this session without a problem. It's a Monday afternoon here. I'm going to try and speed through this so we can get the last of the light. We've just had a warm autumn day. I think we've topped 30 degrees or so nearly, so that's pretty warm. Anyway, let's kick on here. Number 60. This album, what could I say? A lot of my favourite albums on this thing have what I'd call a questing feel. The artist is trying to reach this bigger truth, something beyond their current sort of station, and it brings with it this kind of vulnerability and naivety to the proceedings. You know, there's these uncharted waters they're trying to get into, and that's kind of this album in a nutshell for me. Clouds Taste Metallic from 1995 by Flaming Lips. Here they're really grabbing at the big questions of life, but they don't quite know how to frame them at the moment, so they give us stories of watermelons, of guns, laughing giraffes, Christmas at the zoo, hospital ships, lightning striking the postman, you know, or even these beautiful metaphysical love songs like When You Smile, and a song I really had picked for my wedding, but I didn't get to do it another day, another story. Anyway, all of these sorts of things could sound really, really trite, but then behind that musically you've got Stephen Drozd blazing away like John Bonham, and then you got Ronald Jones, their guitarist for just 2 albums, playing what sounds to me like radioactive photon blasts from deep space on his guitar. Something Wayne Coyne once coined, a mix of Kevin Shields and Miles Davis. Amen to that. It's incredible playing on here, and I've really come to the conclusion that this album is the sleeper of the Lips catalogue. All the feelings and sorts of arrangements and everything that they nailed with the soft bulletin start to come together on here, but it's still got their earlier acid-tinged punk edge, and that's what keeps it eternally fresh to me. I don't know why. It's a tough one for me to call, really, too, because I love the soft bulletin. But this is the pick of the Lips catalogue for me. Number 60, Flaming Lips.
It's like, I didn't need to say anything or do much I could tell. All of the summer atomic pieces come together and unfold themselves
Alright, number 59, Talk with Spirit of Eden. Now, some music reaches out to you, but this album, this music here, pulls you in. It's like hearing someone invent a new language for the first time. Musically, this album yearns to be a kind of spiritual jazz, but it ends up being post-rock. Basically birthing post-rock. It's a tapestry to me without a pattern, if you will, stitched together, which is kind of the way the album was made as well, with plenty of non-rock instrumentation, you know, and it's full of contrasting textures and tones, and you can only see what this album is like when it's put together and finished whole, because as a piece it wouldn't seem to work. 6 long songs on here, more or less interwoven in their theme and mood, and that mood is spirituality and earthiness, put simply. It takes over 2 minutes just to start as Mark Hollis builds up this world that he wants to bring us into. And it sounds like this dawning upon a universal truth, the way that sort of slowly comes in. Something completely spiritual beyond the physical world. The track Eden, to me, there's this jaw-dropping build and release, which is just so subtle but incredibly emotional to me. And at the heart of these two piano chords that just completely dissolve me even, every single time. Tracks like Desire, though, they're earthy, they're visceral. You know, it's this swinging drumming from Lee Harris. He drums fantastically throughout this, you know, squalling feedback and those really earthy textures rubbing up against each other. And then songs like I Believe in You really balance the two in the one song quite spectacularly. It's an incredible album. Again, hard for me to separate this from their next one, Laughing Stock, but I feel like this has just got a tiny bit more of this world before they drifted off into the ether with Laughing Stock. And for that to latch onto here, it just gives it the edge. Still though, there's very little else quite like this album out there. Beautiful stuff. Talk. Alright, Andrew Tales from the Crate, he's got this kind of occasional record he calls, and I don't know the exact word he puts for it, but it's the music that brings in this kind of perverse joy, the stuff that he shouldn't like, but he really, really does to it. Anyway, this album is one of those to me with Magazine, Secondhand Daylight, 78 or 79, depends on where you were. Anyway, from the sick dystopic fairground intro of Feed the Enemy, there's this monochrome sickness at the album's core to me that somehow shoots me right into the heart of what 70s Thatcherite Britain must have sounded like. The band, to me, they gel much better than you would imagine on paper. You know, we're talking post-punk here, but, you know, thudding drums, these almost proggy keys from Dave Formula, the sculpted bass, I don't know how better to put it, from Barry Adamson. It's fantastic stuff. The obtuse whip and snap of John McGeoch on guitar, always twisting and turning, a big influence on, say, Joey Santiago from the Pixies, I reckon. And then atop all of that, Howard Devoto, vocals, lyrics, complete ringmaster of these proceedings. Occasionally you get this kind of perverse blast of easy listening sax in there, or you know, some twinkly synths to remind you it ain't no buzzcock. What it is, it's post-punk, but it's flirting with prog rock in a way that revels in its moody monochrome sickness. You know, there's barely a whiff of a weak track on here. Great sequencing. You know, you've got an instrumental, The Thin Air, starting side 2 just to give you a breather, and this phenomenal closer in the Moore's Murder feel saga of Permafrost. Amazing stuff. Devoto and company are masters here of conjuring up a feeling of loathing and menace like few else I can imagine, really. And I somehow can't wait to buckle in and enjoy this dark misanthropic ride. Fantastic stuff. Magazine for number 58. Number 57. Space Monkeys vs. Gorillaz, Like a Come Home from 2002. Now, if you can't see that, there's a little poster slightly better. So it's CD here because the vinyl is hideously expensive nowadays. But anyway, what it is you've got pop chart busters Gorillaz given a digital dub makeover with their vocal and melody snippets of their hit songs cut adrift and then placed floating in and out of your speakers, while digital bass massages your body. And while it's clearly engaging in the dub and remix lineage here, the cleverness is in balancing those pop hooks with the dub roots, and they just nail it so spectacularly on here. And lest all this sound a bit dry, the production here is pure dub reggae wonder. You know, there's those warm, soulful horns, clearly influenced by Lee Scratch Perry or melodica, just like Augustus Pablo. So it knows its stuff, it knows its history. There's a dub influence on electronic production is what you really feel coming through here as well. It's not too heavy or too light. It doesn't ever leave you feeling smoked out. I love this album. definite happy place for me. Reminds me of late 20s, going down to a family beach house and the beach. Just a much simpler time, and such a feel-good album. And I really think it absolutely holds its own here on this list. One of the great dub albums of the past 25 years. Alright, 56, Rock Bottom, Robert Wyatt, 1974. Man, what do you say about this? This has been hard to write. Well, I guess I could say I've only known this now for about 4 or 5 years, and it's already made 56 in the list. My first listen on this one completely stunned me. I felt like I was entering this self-contained world located somewhere in the cover art, you know, that rock bottom right underneath the ocean somewhere. You know, lost I was when I was listening. Not swimming, but completely submerged, and it still puts me there every time I listen. It's art rock, but strong jazz roots in there, and the piano, the percussion, the brass, all topped off with Robert Wyatt's warm, reedy voice and his oblique, humorous, dark lyrics. There's a moment there on A Last Straw where he basically, his vocals imitate the brass, and it just utterly charms me. He solos with his voice, something he does throughout his career. Songs Aleph Ibn Alefi, utterly conventional love songs to his wife or partner Alfreda Benj, and then you've got Ivor Cutler's spoken word on ending each side, which just strangeness and charm personified, fits in perfectly with this album. There's other collaborators on board that contribute significantly, but somehow there's this quiet force of will that Wyatt presides over on the world that he's bringing into being here. I don't know, I just wonder sometimes too how much of a role Robert Wyatt's paraplegia had on this album. You know, is that why it exists kind of on its own plane in a way? And I still haven't found an album that sounds anything quite like it. So if you guys know, please give me a suggestion. I'd love to hear what matches up to Robert Wyatt. Rightio, this album had to make it. The only surprise to me was how low I put this one. LCD Sound System, Sound of Silver from 2007. A classic rock album that actually feels more at home in a club. Rock double album, I should say. This album rode the noughties revival zeitgeist with a really intelligent mashing of rock and dance influences, along with a good dose of musical hero worship. You can tell they're fans of music, you know, and I really love that on there. There's this Sound of Silver notion. Is kind of a factory thing where they're creating a Warhol-esque factory for themselves and their friends to get creative in, and they line the whole rented space with foil and that to create that silver factory feel of Warhol, so they could get down to business and of creation. I love that idea, and it sort of comes through too. But this album for me is also about coming into influence in my 30s, you know, the turn of life. There's this feeling of getting on and doing things, that this ain't no dress rehearsal anymore, and it really wraps that up. But it still says that there's time to dream, but the time to act slipping away. So, and you really get that too with the emotional core on this album. The two songs as centerpiece are Someone Great and All My Friends. Someone Great's this downbeat meditation on loss and memory, while All My Friends, a song that gives me chills every time I hear it, you know, right from that jangled VU piano in and building over 7 minutes until you're basically jumping and screaming along with it. If I could see all my friends tonight, to me it feels like a half decade of life telescoped through one night on a dance floor. All those kind of nights where the memories fade but the feelings just enter your DNA. An incredible piece of work, and one that soundtracked a lot of good and other times for me. One of the shining albums of the noughties, hands down. If you haven't heard it, LCD Sound System, the one to go for from them. Number 54, La Dusseldorf, Viva from 1978. Now I'm a big fan of Klaus Dinger, and this second album here with his post-Neu project La Dusseldorf is kind of his swing for the bleachers, and he really connects on this. Viva's that moment where krautrock goes stadium rock, if you want to put it that way. The schlagery opening title track soon gives way to the punkish new wave of white overalls, while Rhaenyra drips with this kind of 60s nostalgia that's really hungover feeling to it. And that all soon launches into the anti-consumer tirade of Gelb, slashing fuzz guitars and metronomic drums that sound even now, well, 40 years ahead of their time. Really amazing stuff, and that's all just on the first side. Paves the way for Cha-Cha 2000, which is basically Klaus Dinger's manifesto. The song and feeling he perfected and would almost be doomed to repeat for the rest of his music career. Starting off with a whispered "Future's Calling." Dinger reminds us over 20 minutes, over the whole side, of the song building, peaking, falling away, and then kind of crucially as well, rebuilding back up to the peak. That those 60s dreams of freedom, of hope, they're not lost, and if we want it bad enough, we can still make that world our paradise today. You know, and that's, to me, is a reminder that we need more than ever. Cha-Cha 2000 never ever fails to melt my cynical heart, and it still awes me with every spin. It's an anthemic album, this one, Viva, and it's one for the dreamers. Like Klaus Dinger himself, it's flower power, but with a punk heart to it. Fantastic stuff. This is a Japanese press, original press on the Telefunken label. Number 53, Teenage Fan Club Bandwagon-esque from 91. Opens with the concept, and that to me, it's all that's great about rock and roll. Those opening lyrics, right down to the 3-minute unhurried guitar coda. Beautiful stuff. Gloriously messy. Just about the perfect blend for me, this album, of guitar noise and sweetness. I suppose I look for that in a few different ways, but here it delivers. The power pop of What You Do to Me almost sounds sometimes like a slacker Big Star, especially on tracks like December. But there's also this half-speed kind of Dinosaur Jr. feel on things as well. Songs like Pet Rock and Metal Baby. This album for me, though, really dwells unashamedly almost, in uncertainty. Not something you hear a lot of rock albums professing, I suppose. Songs like I Don't Know and Guiding Star here, all those times, for me, it sort of summarises in your 20s when you're trying to figure out just how to shape the world, being overawed at the task and, mostly in no hurry to even start because you wouldn't know where or how. And Alka Holiday, to that end, is about the perfect anthem and summary of that feeling. It almost struggles against its own inertia to start, then has these wonderful elongated verses and melodies, and they seem to switch place with the choruses in a way. It's really, really interesting. Multiple bridges in there thrown in to add confusion, and finally it just sort of solos its way out of this track. It never reaches any real conclusion, but it just stays in that feeling of uncertainty. Really magical stuff. Hearing that just trips me back, or this whole album really, back into that time when all life's possibilities sort of still felt open-ended. I don't mean to sound too pessimistic on that, but and even as my pathways narrow as you grow older in time, there's still this melancholy sweetness on this album to burnish away those little doubts of the choices you make over the years. May it always be so. A treasured album. What hasn't been said about this one? I mean, I guess I could say I used to rate it higher. It's always going to have a place in my heart and in my 100 records, I think. And it's always going to feature in lists like these, you know, because it's good. I mean, it's a phenomenon, really. It's oral candy. It's so well recorded and mixed. It'll continue to be discovered by fans of great music. And it's just beautifully made, you know. All those lyrical themes of the Floyds' earlier albums sort of coalesce into this meaningful statement. It's Pink Floyd beginning to peak. At the same time, though, this album has become a bit didactic to me over the years. I suppose I've played a lot, I've lived it and enjoyed it. It's a bit conceptually obvious, I suppose. It doesn't leave quite the room for me anymore to imagine into the music the way other albums of Floyd's do. But that said, you know, there's still so much to love on here. The subtlety of this album, those eight bar drones that Rick Wright plays in time, still things to look out for, you know, the wetness of, and just the thought behind Gilmour's tone on his guitar. You know, the early experimental Floyd throwbacks like Breathe and On the Run, Any Colour You Like and On the Run. You know, to me that stays fresh. The production on this, timeless still, you know. Look, it deserves its place in any top list. It's timeless. It's iconic, you know. It's Dark Side. How could it not be on there? Just thought I'd show, because it's always nice to see these things. The posters, I don't have the stickers or the other ones, but yeah, look, the packaging. What an album. An Australian quad press. They sold a lot of quads of this album in Australia. Anyway, 52. At number 51, Mogwai with Come On Die Young. This is the 4LP deluxe version that came out a while back. Anyway, this is Mogwai's second album from 1999, and with this album, they almost invert the sonic onslaught they got quickly renowned for on their first one. And with this album, kind of make the quietest loud album I've ever heard. I never find a better way to put that. It's post-rock for sure, but it sees the band moving away from the slint pole of quiet loud, even though that's still there, into a slightly more lushness of talk style post-rock. Anyway, this album is just something that's entranced me for quite a long time. My first exposure with them was seeing them live in 1999, touring this album, and still one of the best concerts I've ever seen. Musically, I get lost in the drums on this album, the playing and the sound of it. You can hear the room, the cymbals splash away like oceans. You know, there's space. Somehow it delivers, the drums deliver space amongst this oppressive feel of the rest of the album. It's this album, but it feels very insular, but is frequently stunning in its beauty, you know. There's subtle creeping dynamics which bleed into the sequencing even for me. You know, you've got this album stacked with shorter songs, and then these 3 longer songs that almost make up half the album almost sneak up on you at the finish, and obliterate you basically, even sonically as well. Just amazing stuff. It's even got an intro by Iggy Pop and a coda in there to make it feel like this grand statement. I'm not sure what that feeling that delivers, but the Iggy Pop statement's always been a big one for me as well, talking about punk rock. And this is their own kind of punk rock here in a way. It's inverted punk rock almost. Mogwai, Come On Die Young. Yeah, it's a bit hard to stick a sound sample of Mogwai in because so little happens in a short space of time, but I did my best. I hope that gave you a feel of what they're about anyway. Thank you so much, everyone. Cheers to you all. I'm sorry this has taken a month now to follow up, but there's been travel and other things in the way too, so it's good to be back. Hopefully I can keep this ball rolling now on the top 100 as we get into the top half. Can't believe we're at the top half already, and it's going to get a bit more obvious, but hopefully there'll still be a couple of surprises in there for you all. So let me know what you think, if there's any albums you've loved in here, any ones that played a big part in your lives, or you just don't think are cut out to be a top 100 material. Let me know. I'd love to hear what you're all thinking on this one. From this darkening backyard, take care everyone. I'll talk to you all soon. Thank you.